Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport. Watch every Munster and Leinster game only on Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland.
Okay, so the European action returns. Heineken Champions Cup round 3 is upon us. On Friday, Ulster are away to Scarlets. On Saturday, Leinster are away to Bath. That one is live and Off the Ball. On Sunday, we're at Thomond Park. Munster host Castres at 1 o'clock. And in the Challenge Cup, Connacht will host Perpignan at the Sports Ground at 3 o'clock. Keith Wood, you should be there. Hello.
I am here. How are you, Joe? Are you well?
Very well, thank you. And Brian O'Driscoll's made a rare trip in for a Wednesday night rugby.
Feels good.
It's exciting times.
Feels good.
Yes, indeed. So I'll get to the rugby in just a second. There was an interesting study I wanted to put to you both, which has caught a few headlines today, done by the International Rugby Players. So they have surveyed 350 players from every World Cup team who's qualified for the World Cup next year. The headline they're going with is that 45% of players felt pressurised to play when fully fit by their coaches. Was one of the big takeaways.
When not
pressurised when not fully fit.
When not fully fit, yeah. Did I say when fully fit?
Yeah.
Okay. I would hope that's 100%, but...
but probably not.
Probably not either. 45% felt pressurised to play when not fully fit by their coaches. I mean, I think what jumps out at a few of us here, we were just talking briefly off air, Brian, is I would think there is a self-imposed pressure on the behalf of every player.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Because in reality, my experience of playing professional rugby, there a huge portion of my career, certainly the latter half, I wouldn't have played at 100% very often. I think you look at players like Rob Kearney at the moment, and he's been talking about how great it feels to feel fully fit again, how ultimately for 2 or 3 seasons he was carrying knocks and niggles that no one knows about. But to actually go out there and feel as though you have a fighting chance, and you need it in the modern game now as well. You need to be fighting fit. So yeah, I look back and it doesn't surprise me that the pressure from coaches, for me it was a self-imposed pressure that you want to be on the pitch, and other than injuries that are going to do you harm or that you aren't fully aware of, i.e. HIA or head injuries where you have to have science dictate what your return to play is. There's circumstances within carrying niggles, carrying soft tissue injuries, carrying slight ligament damage, recoveries from surgery. If there's big games of big magnitude, well, you can maneuver the rules a small bit on return to play, provided you're not going to do any lasting damage, or provided that taking the risk that you take isn't likely to exclude you from fixtures for another month or 2 months, where the short-term fix is to the loss of the long-term gain.
So you don't recall too many occasions, or any occasions I'm sensing, where you didn't want to play and a coach said, "Brian, I need you to play. Get out there, please."
No, I don't, because I can remember ones where lots of ones where I might have wanted to play, and the coach said, "You know what? Let's hold off for one more week." Very clearly, the French game in 2007, the first one in Croke Park, I had a hamstring injury going into it. I felt as though I could get by without working on 100%. I did a fitness test and I passed it without being very confident, but I thought I can manage here. And Eddie O'Sullivan said, "Listen, let's hold off for 2 weeks' time against the English. Feel as though we probably have enough here, to go without you. So which makes it all the more torturous watching the end result where we lost in injury time.
Yeah.
But they're really the decisions rather than feeling pressure from a coach.
Yeah, Keith, you had your fair share of injuries, and I think a legacy afterwards where you had to try and deal with some of the fallout. To what extent were they due to pressure from management, and to what extent were they due to pressure from yourself?
None from management.
Okay.
I can say that very comfortably. I was never asked to play when I didn't think I could play. There was a couple of occasions when I think there's a level of calculated risk as to what you do or don't do. The only time I was put under pressure to play, I wasn't injured, but I wasn't fit, if that makes any sense. I had come back from the Lions in 97, I tore my groin and I put my back out, and it just took a large period of time where I could do nothing. I had 3 injuries coming back from that. I'd had surgery before I'd gone out. one of my shoulders was still very, very sore. I was limited in what I could do in the gym. I tore my groin and tore my left ankle ligaments, and they were very painful. So I was kind of under pressure as what I could do, and my back was murder. And I got it right, and I got the all clear in it. And I remember it was on a Tuesday before the first match of the season, and I had done no training. I mean, little to nothing. I mean, it wouldn't have been allowed to happen now in terms of you wouldn't really go back onto the field. And I wanted a few weeks off to train, not off. I wasn't injured anymore. I just wasn't anywhere near physically fit. And I suffered that year, actually. I suffered in 98, 97, 98. I didn't finish a lot of games. I didn't finish any international, which I always would have wanted to have finished and wanted to be able to play to the end. And I found that very frustrating, but it was just for the fact that there was a need to get back out and play there and try and get fit as the season went along. It didn't work out that well for me, but was I under pressure? Was I injured? No. I just wasn't fit enough, and that was kind of part of it. I think you want to play all the time, and I would have said that at the start of my career, I most definitely played in games I shouldn't have played in.
Yeah.
But that's my fault.
Yeah, I think that is the theme in rugby. It's such a physical game, as Brian says. It's very rare that you're 100%, and that's true of a lot of sports as well, to be fair. It's interesting timing in the survey because we spoke with an Alan Dimmock yesterday. He's the features editor with Rugby World magazine, and he did a pretty interesting column piece on the lengths that players are going to get themselves on the field. So some anecdotes which jumped out from that piece. Jacques Berger, people will remember Jacques from Saracens in particular. In my last 3 years, he said, every day I took painkillers. It was a way of life. It was mostly paracetamol and ibuprofen. There was a quote from an Andrew Combs as well from Dragons in Wales. My locker full of medication just to get through training, he was saying. You become your own chemist in a way. I saw players go to the local GP away from the club. I certainly did. You just want to stay in the job as long as possible. He had a quote from Paul O'Connell's book in it as well, where O'Connell was talking about having to take diphene on Fridays and Saturdays. He said it was like a miracle drug, except it disagreed with my stomach. And in his book, O'Connell was talking about rugby needs to exert vigilance over legal pain-killing medication because that's when people's livelihoods are at stake. It's human nature, and some will go too far. And in the going too far camp, Lewis Moody, he was talking about when he was diagnosed with colitis, horrific stomach cramp, blood left in the toilet, terrible illness. He said, I was taking drugs so I could play ibuprofen and so on. I was like a walking medicine cabinet. I remember one story, we were on a bus. It was like a challenge to see how many, quote, Smarties we could take. That was around 2008. And what kicked off Dimmock's piece is he was talking to an ex-Premiership player who said, our doc used to walk around with a frisbee full of painkillers before the game. So this is all legal medication, but there seems to be a real culture, Brian, of having to take it. To what extent and how big a culture it is hard to know. This is anecdotal stuff.
Yeah, a lot of those are extremes.
They are.
But the final one, I would have been privy to that, where I'd have been part of teams where, on the way to a game, a doctor would have walked down the bus on the way to the game and inquired as to who wanted what in advance of it. For me, for the last couple of seasons, anyway, would have been part of, my match prep would have been a diphene and a couple of cocodamol.
What would they do for you?
Again, just a painkiller. Okay. Just if I was carrying something, that it would just. Do you know what? It almost became like habit, where it gave me a fighting chance if I wasn't. If I wasn't feeling 100%, that it might have leveled it up, and
which might have been most of the time.
Which was probably a lot of the time,
yeah.
And that is the reality of it. And
if you,
I wouldn't have been the only one doing that.
Yeah.
It was usually the older players, just to try and get you, balance the equilibrium almost of feeling okay. And then I'm sure at times without, in my subconscious, I would have taken it because it became part and parcel, where maybe I could have done without it. But again, if it's perfectly legal and there's no need for TUEs,
yeah.
Or any of that, give yourself a chance of playing your best game.
So it was almost akin to your glucose drink and your energy drink and your whatever.
I also had caffeine before games.
Yeah.
I'd have three little tablets of caffeine, like chewing gum, chew them for a certain period of time. Like, you get into a routine where I knew exactly what I did. I had it down to the final seconds, chewing, and as soon as I ran out onto the pitch, I'd bin it and it would be done. I lie, I wouldn't bin it. I'd bash it away somewhere into a hedge, and then off I'd go and do my my pre warm up before we got together with the team, and that was just part and parcel of my last. Certainly 3, maybe more, 4 or 5 years, yeah.
And would it have crossed your mind this can't be great for the insides one way or another?
No, I was very conscious from a diving perspective. I could never take diving on an empty stomach. That would pull your stomach apart. So I never ever took a diving on an empty stomach. Always very conscious, and not with a drink in the morning or a glass of orange juice or a cup of coffee. You'd need to eat and then make sure full, and then I'd never had an issue. But it's always something that stayed with me. If I'd have some diving in my golf bag now. Mightn't take one, before I tee off. But if I stiffen up out on the round, I might take a diving. So I didn't have to go to any other GP. My old man was at home. Not that he was gonna. He was far from one to hand out drugs or nonchalantly. But I suppose within the Leinster and Irish setup, at that time they were accessible. You could get your hands on diving.
Is that less the case now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you've got to fight your case a little bit more and prove the necessity of having them. Certainly, drug cabinets that might have been open once upon a time are very much shut and inaccessible.
I heard that from a player fairly close to the situation now, right? That there's a stock take regularly taken at the moment in Leinster, and it's changed that culture. And
that used to be for sleepers as well. Players, diazepam to try and counteract. What would happen with the caffeine because they couldn't sleep and so on, and that was. I'm not saying it was the culture, but it happened.
Keith, I don't think anybody would be shocked to hear any of that, really. I mean, we're fairly well aware of that at this stage, and rugby's such a physical game. Does Brian's experience tally with yours?
Yeah, there's some similarities, some differences. Anti-inflams, definitely. I had a dicky stomach as well, so I take some anti-inflams, but you have to be very careful with them. Painkillers, no, strangely, didn't take a huge number of painkillers, and just as a factor of age, when I started playing, caffeine was banned, and so I never got to the point of taking caffeine tablets at all, because there was a period of time, I think in the early to mid 90s, where too much caffeine was banned, which would lead to huge levels of nervousness if you had a cup of coffee, and you were trying to figure out what you could drink or not drink, as in socially. But yeah, it's funny, I know, because we've had some of these conversations before, and we've tried to touch on different things at different times. And, in many respects, I would have said that, look, these were things that the doctors used to give us that were fully legal, and they are fully legal. And it is fine under which to take them, but it is the overuse of them is an issue. And I think it also then comes in and tallies with this idea of overplaying and the pressure to play and all those sort of stuff. I think it's a very interesting study, and I often wonder when you look at studies, what are the questions that are asked as opposed to what are the answers that are given. Because in a lot of cases you'd say, well, we think we're playing too many matches, and they were saying you should play between 20 or 25. It's going to be very hard to find teams that'll pay you to play 20 or 25, pay you the amount of money you're paying now. And that comes down to all this big issue that happens with sport, that you kind of get pushed eventually to the end of it as to what is right and what is wrong. So I know there's people who think that if you take a paracetamol because you have a pain in your head, that's not right. Well, there's a line. The line is drawn, and it's whether those lines need to be drawn again or redrawn again. That's a valid question.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area. If you're rugby world governing bodies and you're listening to this, or you're IRFU or team doctors or any of the heads of teams, so what's going on. It's legal to take what the players are taking, so players are going to do it and do whatever it takes and maybe abuse it, and maybe it just becomes a habit. Whether I've a headache or no headache, I take my energy drink and I pop my painkillers, and that gives me an extra something when I go out there. Doesn't seem on the face of it good, so they may have to decide, how are we going to tackle this? And then do you get to a point where your Panadol or your ibuprofen is illegal when you play sport.
Well, what is player welfare? It's not just playing games or minding them from on field. It's potentially, it goes beyond that. And yeah, this definitely comes into the realms of player welfare, where they won't protect them against themselves from taking these things.
Because it's good for them if the players play and take them.
Because you have to understand too, you play games, you make money, you have a better quality of life. It's a simple pyramid, where you have more chance of achieving success. The more you play, the better.
Well, sorry to interrupt. Jacques Berger, Moody, Combs, all of these people, they certainly said I'd do it again. Like Jacques Berger said, well, I would tell younger players to be wary of this whole area. I took them every day for 3 years. I'd tell younger players to watch out for that and the long-term effects. But I would do it again in a heartbeat.
I wouldn't change a whole lot.
Yeah.
No, because granted that they're coming from a different, particularly Lewis Moody, coming from a place where he's had massive ill effects, colitis, incredible discomfort, same as Darren Fletcher with United.
Yeah.
So to say, for me that's a strange thing to say, that he'd do it all again, considering it's affected your livelihood, while you were playing and thereafter. But anyway, I haven't felt any adverse effects. Ask me at 75, and see what the state of my inside is like. I didn't take so many Difene that I'm concerned now, but there will be players out there that, some Andrew Coombs, like taking them every single day cannot be good for you. That cumulative effect of that, I don't care. You don't have to be a doctor to work that out.
Yeah. There was one other point I just wanted to put to you, and then we'll get on to the fixtures this weekend. One of the respondents in the survey, this is a quote from him, but I think a few players raised it, was about the amount of contact in training. So he was saying the contact training in club and international needs to be limited. There's enough contact week to week in games, so I don't see why there's any in training. Players need to be protected from under pressure coaching. And I do remember Donncha O'Callaghan, when he was at Ulster and was on the show for a time, was talking about too much contact Monday to Friday. It was quite an old school thing. And this has come up in the NFL and various things, Brian, about the amount you're doing Monday to Friday. So that was a quote which caught my eye in the survey as well.
I thought it was a thing of the past.
Right.
Like, genuinely, certainly under Joe Schmidt, and even Michael Cheika for the last few years, definitely, it was noticeable how much, the more games you played, the higher quality of the games, the less contact you did. It was all about simulation. It was all about body height. You might have done 5 minutes just to harden the body on a Tuesday or a Monday, Tuesday usually, and then taper off for the rest of the week. But it's still, and Joe's a big one on that, is looking back on video and saying, if you don't have your body height there, I don't think that you're going to be fit to do that job. So make sure your body height is there. So it's without the actual contact, it's full simulation as to what position you're going to find yourself in. So you're doing everything but adding the pressure of collisions.
Okay, well, it's a global survey, so to be fair, I mean, it's not going to be like there's best practice absolutely everywhere. Turning to the weekend's games then, so Leinster away to Bath. The state of the group at the moment is that Toulouse are on 8 points in first spot, Leinster are on 6, Bath are on 4, Wasps are on 3. So there's a little less elbow room for Leinster after that defeat in France. And ultimately, when you're talking about Leinster and how they're viewing this pool, Keith, really they're targeting home quarter and semi-finals. We know the importance of home advantage at those stages of the competition. So that's in their minds as they head to Bath. Bath are struggling a bit in the Premiership. They drew 7-7 against Sale last day out, and there's question marks over the head coach. It seems he's on the way out, though we don't know exactly when, and there's links with Stuart Lancaster as well. So on a presumably heavy pitch, as it tends to be, you'll know it well, Leinster will be targeting a win for sure.
It is. It's a kind of intimate pitch and a bit muddy at this time of the year. It's very close to the water there in Bath, and it seems to always hold it a fair amount. I would still look. I look at Leinster and look at how they've played all season, with the exception of that one game in the group. They're head and shoulders ahead of everybody else, and if they remember that and play accordingly, they'll be fine. If they get stuck in a dogfight where they lose their way, and it is a bit difficult coming back after autumn internationals, and a huge amount of Leinster players have featured over the autumn. They just need to get to the pitch of the game very quickly, and if they do, I don't worry about them. I don't worry about them they'll have tough matches for the rest of it, because all these groups are very tough now. But I'd still hold out that they're the best team in the competition. They could lose again, and it makes life an awful lot more difficult for them. So they just need to bring their A game. And wins away from home are still very difficult, but I think they would expect to go there to win well, and to come back home and win well again. And suddenly that whole table looks very different.
Yeah, there is the back-to-back layer to these games. Wasps are at home to Toulouse this weekend, by the way, and then we're in France the following weekend. Like, you look at the celebrations in Toulouse when they beat Leinster, they have become a scalp, like a real scalp, and Bath will be up for this game just because it's Leinster, even if they don't think they can get through the pool. Beating Leinster kind of makes your month almost. They've become that size of a team.
And what a compliment it is.
Yeah.
I think as well, Leinster were far from peak Leinster that we've seen this season, probably in that Wasps game. They were absolutely exceptional in that. That said, the last number of weeks with their second and some third string players, they've run in bonus points for fun. So it seems to be burrowed down right into the core of the academy, where this philosophy, it doesn't matter who the personnel are, which bodes well for them going forward. But Leinster weren't a million miles off from Toulouse. It's an intercept that goes up the end of the pitch that maybe they go on and score from that phase of play, and it's a 5-pointer. They get their bonus point and they win by, they get 5 points from the game, and they're sitting pretty at the top of the table on 10 versus losing the game. So the margins, even from their perspective, are tiny between being in a brilliant position and only being in a good position. That said, there's a lot of pressure on them this weekend up against Bath. The reality of securing a home quarter final if you lose 2 away games is not good. So they do need to perform. They know how to get it done on multiple pitches, on different surfaces, in different scenarios. So I don't think that is of a concern. These days, the players don't need a game together for cohesion. You get it at training, particularly under Stuart Lancaster. I think they'll have had the legs run off them last week and maybe taper down a small bit this week. But just if you balance the two up with the confidence of the returning Irish players to the province, the quality of players that have come in and done a job in the last 3-4 weeks. When you're able to carry 3 back row injuries like O'Brien, Dan Levy, and Jack Conan, and still have someone like Rhys Ruddock that comes in, does a brilliant job, Josh van der Fleer. So they're still in great shape, and I fancy them to have too much for a Bath team that haven't really fired yet this season.
Yeah. It's funny, you mentioned Lancaster there, so there's links with Bath which have really cropped up this week, Keith. There's obviously links with the Andy Farrell ticket, and I see today, I was just reading The Guardian, there's now links with even England are semi-interested again in Farrell publicly. So Nigel Melville is talking about how, he wants to speak with Warren Gatland, it seems. He says, I'll speak to Warren and a number of others, and then was talking about Lancaster. I'm English, this is England, of course it'd be great to have an English coach. I haven't spoken to Stuart. I'm not sure if it's the path he sees for himself, but I'll be meeting with everyone who's a potential target for us. So I'm sure if Lancaster really wanted, he could text Melville and say, let's have a chat. That was how I interpreted that. So Lancaster has a decision to make, Keith.
Yeah, I think the English decision is a different one. I think he, I don't think it sat very well with him getting shafted at the end of a World Cup. And, a lot of guys they always say you should never go back either. And for a guy who is a coach, like he's not a manager of sorts, and I think Brian would know more about that, but he's a very hands-on, wants to be in the tracksuit coach. He has a dream job in Leinster. It's not to say that he wouldn't have it elsewhere, but he went through a level of rehabilitation once he joined Leinster, and he is loved in Leinster. That's still a hard thing to move over. Now there could be an awful lot of cash sitting elsewhere, and it just depends. Look, I don't know Stuart very well. I've met him a few guys. He is a guy of integrity. He is a guy of honesty. And I think he's a guy of loyalty, right? So that doesn't mean he would absolutely stay in Leinster, but I think it might be a huge deal to kind of pry him away from Leinster, because he's rebuilt. A lot of guys, when they fail at the international level, don't get the chance to rebuild. Some do because they've got brass necks and seem to be able to go in and out of jobs everywhere. But people who are kind of dashed on the rocks a bit, like Lancaster was, rarely get that chance to come back so quickly. And what he's happened to do in Leinster has been phenomenal, and you can hear it from every single player that talks about him. So it's whether he's rushing to get back into an English system or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, none of us really know.
I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say
to
no.
the England thing, anyway.
Well, to the England thing,
Andy Farrell in Ireland?
No, I don't. I think from an Irish perspective, that mightn't be a smart play.
Why?
Because there's baggage that comes with that, because of the column inches that you create, because it didn't work once. Fool me once, shame on you. So I don't know. I just think that's something that isn't really for me isn't one on the cards. I think Stuart. I do believe I probably know him a little bit better than Keith. He's been an incredibly generous coach to me as a pundit in trying to understand the nuances of the game and the evolution of the game over the last 4 years. And I do feel, I don't think I'm talking out of turn in saying I think he does feel badly scarred by what happened over in England, and that he was thrown under the bus in a major way. And I smile at Melville saying, throwing that bone out from he'll be waiting for a text for a while, I'd imagine.
Okay.
But I think Stuart does have a big sense of loyalty to Leinster because they took an opportunity, they took a chance on him. Yeah. And it's worked out brilliantly. But he hasn't forgotten that. There weren't other teams giving him that opportunity to showcase what he's now subsequently brought. So whether that extends for another year next year, or whether he stays on, or whether he has his own ambitions, I don't know. I don't feel as though it'll be in England, but maybe he'll prove us all wrong. I definitely feel as though he has the scope for he's global reach now, and particularly the style of rugby that he plays. I don't think that limits him to Britain and Ireland in any shape or form. Yeah, you see, and the other point to make, of course, is this is all very personal as well. When people make these decisions, they're human decisions, and he's done interviews with Sunday Papers a couple of weeks back where his father's passed away in the last while, and he's very conscious of the fact his mother is suddenly home alone, and then his kids are in college. He may or may not want to be far away from them. All of these things come into it, and Leinster will obviously want to keep him. If he leaves Leinster, it's very difficult to find someone of his calibre who's happy to go in as a number 2 effectively and do all the coaching and replace him perfectly in the great relationship he has with Leo Cullen. Like, Leinster are going to be really, really doing everything they can to keep this guy for as long as possible. Think about the IP that he's brought in since, England coach. Yeah. Like the pressure that comes with that and the experience that he must have. Yes, it didn't go well, but the wealth of experience. And then on top of it, he's a brilliant coach. So he's seen lots of scenarios. He's seen the worst of it. And now he knows and he's got the ambition and the desire not to go back there again. So he is driving his standards, and he's also inherited a pretty healthy team and an environment in Leinster. So it is almost a match made in heaven. Yeah. The two colliding, but it still had to happen. And like I go back to the point, they still had to take a chance on him because he was damaged goods. I don't think when it was first announced, I can't say everybody was saying this is going to be perfect, this is great. There were raised eyebrows, and let's see how this works out when he was first announced as going to Leinster. Do you share Brian's sense about the Andy Farrell ticket, Keith?
I do, actually.
Right.
I think when Andy Farrell goes in, he won't want to foist anybody or anybody foisted on him. Anytime that ever happens, it works very badly. I think he needs to take his time to make his decision over what it is he actually wants to have in there. And I think working with a coach that he's worked with before, I really think he'd like to be able to put his own mark on it and have it in a style that he would like. And I think it could be the case in a couple of years' time if that was needed, once he has been a head coach for a while. And I think I would agree with that. I don't know about the column inches, whether that's a reason not to do it or not. I know it means you end up fielding questions that you don't want to field. But look, I think we're lucky that guys who were not lucky, actually. Isn't it great that Irish rugby was in a position to see through the English failure in 2015? and say, actually, we have value in these guys. We can get value out of them. We can make them part of the whole thing. And actually, if you look at it, the impact both those have had, and you just listen to the players talk about it. I mean, I've a big interest in Stuart Lancaster because his history has been about bringing young guys through the age groups and making them into serious players. I think that is a fairly phenomenal gift to have, and we're always looking at pipelines in Ireland of what we can actually do. I would never want to see that guy go away. He may be gone out of the system at Leinster, but do we end up with an idea that he could become central to what happens in Irish rugby going forward? They're the sort of conversations I hope are being had, that he may have a view to go off and go somewhere else, but maybe to keep a door open to have him come back, because he's proven it in 2 countries that he's been able to do that. And so for that, yeah, I want to see Farrell get a chance to go as his own man, and see what happens with that.
Rugby and Off the Ball is with Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland, and get your Heineken Star comments into the lads. I'll try and get to them very quickly before we wrap things up shortly. A quick aside as we get to Munster. Joe Schmidt, have you been in since Joe Schmidt announced? I don't know if you have.
No,
maybe
I don't think so. No.
Would you be shocked if he finished coaching, as his statement said, I'm finished with coaching, and went back and became a principal somewhere, or an academy?
Yes, on the principal part. I think there's a.
Yes, you'd be shocked, or yes, you could
I'd be
see
shocked.
It? Yeah, okay.
I think there's a burgeoning business career that he's had a sample of in the last year or so under the radar.
As in corporate consulting and giving advice and leadership and that stuff?
Yeah, which he would be absolutely brilliant at as well. Right. So I wonder is the press and the stress and the pressure, the cumulative effect of from Claremont to Leinster through to Ireland, does it ultimately take its toll? And I think he really enjoys the aspect of having blasts of training. I thought he was going to miss the day-to-day. I think that's what Stuart has loved being back doing in Leinster, whereas I thought Joe was going to miss that, but he says he hasn't at all, which would lead you to believe that the next step is not doing that anymore. And if you're getting the satisfaction of seeing improvement as he's a teacher elsewhere, well, it ultimately can be done in another sector. It doesn't have to be rugby, albeit he knows a hell of a lot about rugby.
He does, yeah.
It wouldn't shock me, because everything that he's said to my face, he's stood up to. He hasn't pulled the blinkers over.
Yeah.
And what he said in the media, 95% of the time has been true to words. So you got to take it at face value.
He's not careless with his words, and it was
he's not. He's
I will finish with coaching was quite deliberate.
He's so considered. He really is.
So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I guess the All Blacks job is the All Blacks job. So,
he said he said he doesn't want it, or he hasn't wanted it. So we'll have to wait and see whether that carrot comes calling another time or down the line. But for now, I think he feels as though he's enjoying what he's doing, and then needs a break. And then you can be sure the Lions is on his radar. Of course it is.
Is that Lions gig a good gig, the way the South Africa tour is scheduled? You don't get much time with the players, you don't get as many games.
But which means it'll be more difficult to do, which means it'll make it all the more remarkable that he's managed to pull a 3-0 series win off.
Fair enough, yeah.
Houdini.
We got to keep things moving. I'm sure we'll come back to that again. I mean, between Lancaster and Farrell's ticket and Joe Schmidt's future, there's so much imponderables here. It's very hard to keep track of what everyone's doing. So Munster Castres on Sunday. This group is far rosier looking than Leinster's from an Irish point of view. Munster top on 7 points, Castres on 5 points, Gloucester 4, Exeter 3. They play on Saturday. Good week for Munster. They announced 12 new contract extensions. I guess the kind of 2 standout points to mention here. One, Joey Carberry and Conor Murray will play together for Munster. That's something to look out for. And then secondly, Chris Farrell was man of the match last weekend against, admittedly, a very understrength Edinburgh side. But I think, is that 2 man of the matches for Chris Farrell, the last one being for Ireland against Wales, and now here he is back in man of the match again. So give us your sense of Farrell. People are talking about this guy as someone who really could make an impact at the World Cup in a big way. How impressed?
He absolutely could. I was very impressed with him before he had the knee surgery.
Yeah.
And to come back, I know he's taken his time in coming back and gotten it right, and it's felt like a long time since February. and a lot of painstaking days involved in the rehab with one or two others. But for him to come back and play almost immediately some of the rugby that we saw, why he got, the rationale for him getting those caps, and why he was being selected in Six Nations, it's very exciting. And he plays the game. He gives you an alternative option as to how you can play your game from an Irish perspective. I think he actually he's really a Joe Schmidt sort of player, because there's a big ask of trying to hit up as a centre pairing quite a lot and give hard yards. And Gary Ringrose probably carries beyond his weight, but Farrell is a big, big man, and that's why Henshaw has so much success in Joe Schmidt teams. That's why Farrell has been good, the showings that we've had. But his subtlety of then doing exactly what Joe Schmidt wants you to do is carry really hard, but then drop it off at the last second. It was the Earls, don't know which of his tries, but when soft hands back inside to Hanrahan, who went back out to Haley, who went back out. It was Conway, his second try. It was absolutely majestic hands for a big man when you're not expecting it. So he catches you by surprise with these moments. He's a lovely passer of the ball. Looks very fluid.
Right, I didn't realise you rated him that highly. Yeah,
I just and this is largely on the basis of the performance of the weekend I'm talking about, but also what he's shown, prior to his injury. I wasn't sure about him when he broke onto the scene and when he went down to Munster. I thought he's going to be, a nice big lump of a player. Give you advantage line. But there's way more to his game than that. Okay. Way more.
So we'll look out for him. Keith Cast, the reigning French champions, which you almost have to remind yourself of at times, they're 7th in the top 14 after 11 rounds. Their budget, they're kind of 22 million euro budget. All the big French sides have over 30 million. That's where they are in the pecking order. They've been talked about as a really good kicking team. They're going to come on Sunday. They are top of the pool. I think you're going to be there for us, actually. Are you expecting much from Cast?
I am, and I expect a lot for them for about 60 minutes. Depends now if they decide that they want to pick a team, because they have a really big history of picking poor teams going away. Yeah. But this is very early on for them to do that. So it's whether if they pick a full team, they will do very well. And I like the idea. It's a huge game for them. It's a huge game in this pool, because if Munster beat them and managed to beat them well, if that were to happen, Castres finished. They'll give up for the rest of it, because all their past performance has shown that is the case.
Which is no harm at all when Munster have to go to France in 6 or 7 days.
Well, I think it's. I don't
know if I agree with you, Keith. Yeah. I don't think they're one of the French teams that actually dig their heels in at home. They've got this hugely proud record at home, and I think they've upset a few teams in the past.
Yeah, I'd have liked to have seen the matches flipped the other way, actually. So I'd like to have seen Munster go to Castres to play, but it'll be gone for the rest of their away matches, and that will happen on this one. So it depends on if they'll dig in, whether Munster have the capacity to go down and win in Castres. I think they can. So, but for that to be the case, they have to win. So it becomes a huge game. Munster have to win at home on Sunday. If they do, they have a good chance the following week. It doesn't mean the Castres will walk out the gate. They don't at home. But it means I think they'll give up for the rest of the matches away from home, which is what they've done in the past.
I agree. I think Munster will win well this weekend. They've won 6 of the last 7 against Castres, and the other one being a draw. They've got a great record against them. I don't think they're anyway afraid of going down to Castres. I think they'll get the job done with a bonus point this weekend, and that might render Castres out of it. They'll still put out a good side down in Castres, but I still feel that Munster, I've been impressed with them the last few weeks, and the depth of their squad, and yeah, they're going to be right in the mix to top that pool again. Okay,
before we go then quickly, clock is right against us. Ulster away to Scarlets on the Friday, so that pool has Racing on top, 9 points, then Leicester 5, then Ulster 4, and Scarlets on 1. So Scarlets know they're out of it, but they're at home against Ulster. You were at, remember at BT, you were at the Ulster game at home to Leicester, Brian. What did you make of them? Where are they?
I was a bit disappointed with Leicester, not to take anything away from Ulster. They upped the tempo in the second half when they needed to. Disappointing they didn't get the bonus point try. But Scarlets are all but out of it if they don't win this weekend. they have come from a similar situation after 2 games a couple of seasons ago and finished top of the pool, but they did get a losing bonus point in both those games. They've only got 1, so they'll have their work cut out, particularly looking at Racing on 9 points in the form that they're in. So I think Ulster might find it difficult over there because Scarlets still like to turn it on in Park of Scarlet, and they beat them there 2 or 3 weeks ago quite convincingly. So if Ulster can get something from that, they might repeat it, and then they're right back in the mix for potentially a second place finish in that pool.
Okay, so big weekend on a few fronts. We'll leave it there. Keith, thanks a million. Brian, thanks for coming to the studio. Cheers, lads.
Cheers.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport. Watch live Pro 14 action on Air Sport this season. Visit airsport.ie.